Hello and welcome to another episode of Last Week in Localization, the show where we talk about the latest from the world of localization, whether that is news, research, or events. I'm your usual host, Sarah Hickey, even though that will change today. I have with me a very special guest, one of my favorite colleagues, Gabriel and our Chief Operating Officer, who's actually here to kind of fill in for me today. Because while I was out on vacation the last few weeks, living life a little bit in Italy, enjoying the beautiful Italian lifestyle, the Nimdzi Interpreting Index came out, which is one of the reports that we publish that I usually produce because I'm the resident interpreting expert. And, usually I invite my colleagues to come along to the show and I interview them or other guests as well about what they do. But since I'm the creator of this here, I can't really interview myself and I didn't want to just talk by myself. So instead, I invited Gabriel to ask me all of the questions that he wants about interpreting.
Yeah, we're flipping the tables on you, right?
Exactly.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, isn't that great? You're on vacation, living the life, and you publish stuff. How does that happen? How does that magic happen?
Well, it happens because I'm a freak when it comes to planning, and I love stuff like that. That I can get all my work done and go on vacation, and basically the work continues in the background. So,
yeah, exactly.
I'm the stereotypical German that way.
Yeah, replying to your emails during vacation. That's very, very German in essence.
I actually did not this time, and I think that's actually more American than German.
Very true. All right. Well, without further ado, now you're taking the back seat and you'll be asked some questions, Sarah. So we're here because we want to talk about the interpreting index. Remind me again, why are we talking about interpreting at all?
You mean in general at Nimdzi or just at this time?
At this time, let's start with that. Let's keep it simple.
Well, at this time, because it was high time that we do an update to our interpreting index, we did it for the first time 2 years ago. I think no one had, at least in the industry, had done like a proper update or like a market sizing and market report about that was specifically for interpreting, because interpreting is usually, it's not fully ignored, but it's definitely not given as much attention as the translation side and other services in the localization industry. That being said, a lot has happened over the last 2 years, especially the last year and a half. Yes, we've had the pandemic, and that came with all sorts of challenges. But for the interpreting world, well, there were also a lot of challenges, but interpreting has become more prominent, I want to say. A lot more people are talking about interpreting. We are getting a lot more requests for consultations for interpreting, especially with the absolute boom we've seen in remote interpreting. That was, of course, fueled by the pandemic. So it's really a great time to talk about what has happened in the interpreting field. Over the last 2 years, and especially the last year, just to see where we're at. I should see in the comments there, Tucker, I was out of office and I will be again next week on medical leave. But right now I'm still here. So Gabe and I are seizing the day to have a private conversation in a very public space. Stefan, it's true. Most people, I think, in our industry do work on vacation. But that is definitely, I think, less common in Germany than in the US. But I'm a very Americanized German, I think, so I do usually tend to work on vacation, but I didn't this time.
Great. Enough talk about vacation. Let's get back to interpreting here. So what's your take? I'm curious here. I want to dig a little bit deeper. You're saying that it's very topical to be talking about interpreting, right? It's the events and whatnot. But I'm curious about your opinion. Is it just purely because, as just circumstance has it that the events have come up, or is it also the contribution of the wider public or people or influencers talking about why interpreting is important? Is it, are we just passively assisting to it, or is there a change in how people talk about interpreting? What's your take on that?
Well, I think something that I will also point out in the full analysis and report that is yet to be published for the Interpreting Index is that I think there's that interpreting has become more mainstream, if we can call it that. So previously, I don't know what it was like for others, but for me, when I talked to friends and family about interpreting, most people didn't really know what that was, or if they did, they associated mostly with, people that walk alongside politicians and diplomats, kind of, or sit in the EU and the Parliament, interpreting at the big conferences. And of course, that's one part of it. But especially over the last year, with the whole boom that we've seen in the general video conferencing platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Meet and WebEx and all of them, I think this is one reason why interpreting has moved more to the forefront. So just because the general public has started to utilize this whole video conferencing idea a lot more, because they also had to, right? I said multiple times at this stage, I think, that even my mother, who is not involved in the side of the world at all, even she had to do some of her classes. She's a teacher on Zoom with her students. So, it has really moved into all areas of life. And that has also opened the door to people kind of exploring what opportunities they have. What else can they do, Especially also with the area, with this whole Zoom fatigue phenomenon. I think this really helped multilingual meetings as well. Because, how do you make a meeting more engaging? This is something I think that event organizers were looking for, and maybe even people that just hold regular business meetings. So I think there's two sides to it. On the one hand, there's the element of necessity. When is it really needed that you have an interpreter, because people really don't share a language? And when can interpreting also, I think it can also sometimes add a little bit to the wow factor and keep people more engaged. On the one hand, because it's more interesting, but also, of course, people can actually engage a lot more in a meeting if they can also speak in their own language, because often you do still have this bias otherwise, that everyone can kind of listen and follow along, but only really the English native speakers are the ones that are very, very fluent, can contribute to the actual debate. Yeah, because for the others, it might not be as easy, or they're a little bit too shy to voice their opinion, and or they can't fully express themselves. So I feel like this whole overall boom of the video conferencing opened the door for more, especially remote simultaneous interpreting. And that was, even within the interpreting field beforehand, a real niche area. Yeah, so even in remote interpreting, you mostly had over-the-phone interpreting. That is probably the most established. And that's followed by video remote interpreting, which is also consecutive interpreting. But remote simultaneous interpreting, it, of course, already existed, but it basically comes from the field of conference interpreting, which is also more niche. So it was a lot more niche. And especially in that area, we've seen so much development now, like new platforms, new features, integrations with big platforms, and then also so much investment from outside the industry. And also just new applications, like there's been requests for RSI for parent-teacher conferences. Or from esports companies that wanted to add RSI to their virtual events. And so this is really something that we have at Nimdzi have said for a while will happen with remote interpreting, is that it will expand the market, that it will open the door to new users of interpreting, really bring it to places where people have never used interpreting before, where they never thought of using it before. And really, the pandemic accelerated that heavily.
There is a lot to unpack here. It does seem like it was the perfect storm of events in a way, but at the same time, like something we like to say a lot here is that the march of technology is inexorable, and technology just marches on. So there's new developments, and it sounds like interpreting has been a field very at the forefront of those advancements, really. But there's also the element that I'm hearing here of accessibility in a way as well. I think that is something that is very much on people's lips these days, and we're talking broadly about language services as being one of the foundations of making products or services accessible. So there's that side of it. What allows, or your sort of interpreting is the textbook definition of accessibility almost, or synonym almost to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that also is like thankfully becoming a bigger theme in our industry and globally, making content available and making meetings accessible to everyone, whether that's people that are visually impaired or that are hearing impaired. And this also brings me to another trend I've seen. So that, of course, once the pandemic hit, at that time, basically, most of the interpreting assignments were on site. There's been remote interpreting, and especially in the United States and some other markets as well, a few remote options were quite established depending on what field you were in. But still, if you looked at the overall market, it was maybe 80-20, so with like 20 being for remote. But then, more or less overnight, that all changed. And on-site interpreting pretty much went down to zero, more or less anyway. So everyone had to try remote interpreting, whether they wanted to or not. But a few LSPs that I talked to, language service providers I talked to, they said that not all of their previous on-site requests pivoted to remote interpreting. Of course, a lot of them did, but they also received requests for what I would call like adjacent services in this regard now. So they said, for example, some of the interpreting demand pivoted to clients requesting more document translations for their conferences, or others wanted closed captions, or others wanted subtitles, but like depending on the needs of the client. Again, this is also to do, I think, with accessibility, like you already said. And for me, having watched the market for a while now, I feel like there's a real big there's a real need for what I would maybe call like a multilingual meeting provider, if we need a new word, So because an MMP,
yeah, you just coined the term.
Because so far we tend to think of, okay, there's interpreting services, then there's services that come from the media localization field, like subtitling, dubbing, captioning, all the different types. But I feel like especially with all the virtual meetings or the virtual events, some of these sides of the market are starting to merge more and more. And I think there is really a need for a provider or providers to, maybe you could become like just the specialist in multilingual meetings. And I know there's people, companies that already say that is what they do. And to a certain extent, that is what they do. But I think it's even not taking it far enough to really cash in on this new trend. I think companies could do a better job at combining this. Sorry, this is all coming to me now because I'm just writing the index as well, that we identified in the Nimdzi 100 already is that, the needs of the buyers, the clients are changing. This is something that you talk about a lot as well, because you do a lot of buyer research. And they're becoming more complex. People want kind of that one-stop solution, and also that a lot of LSPs, they don't just offer language services, they also offer other services. And this whole idea of really adapting your services to your clients and looking at how the market is changing and what end users want. For a long time, we've said, well, okay, people might not like remote interpreting, but the market will decide. If people want it and buy it, then this is how it's going to go, And same as with this now, I think there's a real need for this, like a multilingual meeting provider that can give clients the option or provide several things at once, Interpreting via humans, maybe interpreting via machines also, there's progress being made. Then maybe captions or subtitles, document translations, I don't know. But whatever you need to make your multilingual meeting or event a success. And it shouldn't just be, oh, I do interpreting and I do this and, I do humans, I do machines. I think in the end, someone will emerge that can do all of those things. And you're already seeing this trend also with a lot of companies trying to merge with the big video conferencing platforms like Zoom and Teams, because they're already the event giants, Yeah.
Right. So let's address the Zoom in the room here. Ooh, I did that,
Oh,
didn't I?
very
That
nice,
that
Gabe.
totally wasn't planned. So I remember this from something you wrote a couple of months ago for the Language Technology Atlas that we published in Nimdzi. Shameless plug for a different publication. That Zoom is kind of sort of becoming a player in this industry. And Anna Royer here is commenting that in my
I just
humble
saw that as well.
experience, the clients have been asking for simultaneous interpreting over VRA more and more. They're
Yeah.
reluctant to introduce special platforms and simply rely on Zoom. So here's a question for you. And now you mentioned the notion or the concept of the multilingual meeting provider. Was that? Yeah, I think I got that right.
Yeah.
Um, isn't Zoom going to spoil everyone's party sooner or later with this? What do you think? Aren't they positioned to make more noise than they are already doing?
Possibly. They would be honestly in an excellent position to either do that or partner with someone who can facilitate that. The only thing I would say there is so also I completely agree with what Anna is saying. This is exactly the same trend I'm seeing as well. And I mean, on the one hand, it surprised me at first. On the other hand, it doesn't, because of course, Simultaneous is super nice. It's a great like I want to say feature to add to your meeting. I don't know if feature is the right word now, but of course, it's great if you can have it at the same time rather than having to wait and pause your meeting. So it makes sense from that standpoint. And yeah, lots and lots of people just want to use Zoom because and I can understand it, to be honest. If you're like, if it was me as well, we're all creatures of habit and we like to work with what we know. I don't want to learn about yet another platform, create another password, train all my people on it just for like possibly one meeting or two or something, Instead, I want to use what I know, which for a lot of people, for example, is Zoom. And then I want you, my interpreting provider, to figure out how you can provide your services for me on that platform that I want to use. And that is exactly what has been happening, and why in the Tech Atlas from us, from Nimdzi, we also write that right now Zoom is the de facto largest RSI platform, which is ironic in some way because it's not an RSI platform, which addresses kind of the other topic you brought up. Because so Zoom is predominantly focused on just being like an events and meeting platform, but a monolingual one. So multilingualism, even though they have this RSI feature, it's like a little add-on for them. It's not the company focus, So in that sense, of course, platforms like the big RSI platforms like Kuro, Interprify, Interactio, Voicebox in them, there's loads, but those are some of the bigger names. They are specialists in providing the superior experience for when it comes to multilingualism for the clients and for the interpreters. But they're just simply not as popular as Zoom, and it works on Zoom. I've asked interpreting colleagues, they say, yeah, in the beginning, of course, it was complex, but yeah, it works. There've been a few studies done, and lots and lots of interpreters do most of their remote work on Zoom these days. Clients seem to like it. And so what's been happening instead is then that the RSI platforms have found ways to integrate with Zoom. And initially, I was waiting for like who's going to partner with Zoom, who's going to be the official partner. Someone's going to make it, But at this stage, I actually kind of think maybe we won't see this, because why at this stage would Zoom partner with someone when already everyone else has done the work to integrate with them? Why spend more money on a partnership when A, this is not their focus, and B, everyone is already forced to use their platform, and so it's like, you figure it out. I don't know, it could still happen, but at this stage I feel like maybe it's not as realistic anymore. So and yeah, maybe Zoom will go bigger in multilingualism and steal the show, but I doubt it. I think it might just be this like facilitator platform,
Yeah, this is very fascinating, I find, and who knows, like if they decide tomorrow to conquer the interpreting market, good luck stopping them. It's kind of reminiscent of a similar conversation happening on the translation management kind of tooling technology side, where of late, we've seen the voices. They are sort of small still, but the rumblings around tools such as Slack, which are changing the way people communicate, but not just internally, but companies with their providers, and tools such as Slack having inbuilt or translation management functionality. And just for the fun of it, so recently we've been talking to Zoom, or no, sorry, not Zoom, but Slack, and they mentioned that they developed their own processes built into Slack, and I found that fascinating. If Slack wanted, they would probably destroy the TMS market if they wanted to go that route. So who knows what the future holds? But I feel there's something to, as these platforms become so central to what these companies are doing, whether that's Zoom or Slack, inevitably, something's got to give. Someone's going to have the brilliant idea of, oh, okay, let's build this, multilingual functionality in it, this, translation management system in Slack.
Absolutely. And we always said that, this the boom in the what we call VIT platforms, so it stands for virtual interpreting technology, it's not going to go on forever. At some point, some platforms will disappear and someone will emerge as the winner, or a few companies. Yeah. Right now, we've seen more platforms popping up, actually, but I think that's more out of almost like a little panic that, oh, this is a trend now. We need to do this also. Yeah. But I really like also what Anna and Stefan, so I keep saying Stefan like a German. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this properly.
Stefan is Belgian. I'm not, Stefan, if you're listening to us, I got to say, I'm not sure how do you pronounce it in Belgium.
Yeah, so I'm just going to be German about it for once. I don't even pronounce my own name German, which I should, but I'm going to say Stefan and Anna have great points here because... first of all, Anna was saying that, of course, Zoom is also a lot cheaper than most RSI platforms or other platforms. This is a very big point, I think. And then also what Stefan is saying, that they've made a lot of improvements over the last 2 years. The RSI feature was very rudimentary from what I know. And I recently heard similar... sorry. I recently... heard similar reviews from interpreting colleagues saying it's actually pretty good, or it's actually very usable. So and that doesn't surprise me. So I'm totally losing track here. I'm reading the comments, losing my train of thought. But with the big one standing out, I mean, it's no surprise because I don't know if I'm drawing the right connection here, but if you're looking, for example, at machine translation, Google is the big tech giant. Everyone knows Google Translate. And even though, of course, even Google doesn't just use plainly Google Translate, and we all know that, it's still that the engine is what a lot of companies in our industry use for their products again. So I'm wondering, even though it's not the same relationship, if this is still somewhat similar in the sense that, we've seen the RSI providers and other remote interpreting providers kind of trying to make the most of the boom from the big platforms like Zoom and Microsoft. And, because you could see it as a threat. I think maybe initially companies did and tried to argue against it. But really the smart thing, you're not going to win against them. They're just too popular, So I think really the smart thing is to try to see how can I catch a ride on the same wave. And this is exactly why companies have been looking towards finding the best integration that is, the least work for everyone involved. Because in the beginning, people basically had all these workarounds. And I've seen pictures of interpreting colleagues with 2 screens, a tablet or an iPad, and an iPhone or a smartphone, just to have one conference on Zoom or something. Whereas I think some of the new integrations, they remove a lot of this complexity and make it easier for everyone. So, and that is something that can really work then, I think.
Yeah. On the road to even more accessibility, making it easy, right?
Exactly.
We're trying to make it as easy as possible.
Effortless is the new buzzword, no?
Yeah.
Effortless.
We like that keyword. it does sound like there's a lot going on here. Let's do something impromptu here, sort of market sizing on the spot. Let's help our audience kind of wrap their brains around this, because it does sound like an awful lot of money being thrown around here in this space. What's the size of the market like compared to like the big brother translation here? Like,
well, the big brother would be all of language services, I think, in this case, because I only have those two. So for the whole, in the Nimdzi 100, we estimate the whole size of all language services in the last year at about $57 billion US. The last time we did the interpreting index, so 2 years ago in 2019, we said that the size of the global market was $7.6 billion US. And I actually just recently, last week, finished my new market sizing. That is still, well, it's not fully confirmed yet until I've run it by the big boss, just being honest here. No, but my estimate for now is that it's around 8.3 billion. I was very tempted to size it even higher, to be honest, because when I look at our ranking of the top providers here, this is our ranking. Really, pretty much all of the big ones grew a lot. Of course, we all know that the big ones only make up a certain percentage of the market. They're like on the top. They're like the piece of the iceberg that sticks out of the water, and then underneath is like a whole lot more market. With all the smaller companies and the one or two person businesses. But nonetheless, this is a big indicator as well, of course, and especially if a company like LanguageLine Solutions, they grew in the last year by almost $90 million. So that is a lot, And the other ones grew as well. And we had I think 14.4% growth between the last Nimdzi Interpreting Index and this one. But of course, that's also over 2 years, right? Because the index is not just every year. And so I tried to factor that in my calculation, and that I do know that some of the smaller companies had losses in the last year as well and struggled from the switch with on-site and remote. So I'm absolutely confident that the market did still grow in the last year. Because of all the developments that happened, right? Ultimately, after a while, everyone did pivot to remote. Of course, there's lower margins, but also you have more meetings, and it's a bit of a different game. But I am convinced that the market grew over the last 2 years.
Right. Well, there is money in this, and it's been growing. That's for sure. So I'm going to test your memory here for a second. So
okay.
We spent a whole chunk of time talking about Zoom, and I feel like we're not talking enough about the actual interpreting service providers, those that have it in their name. So when you compare the ranking from 2 years ago, and we had 33 companies there that time, we have 35 now. Who made the biggest leap? What are the companies that stand out? Like they jumped the highest,
Oh man, yeah, that is totally putting me on the spot, man. Let me see who jumped the highest.
Or who made the most waves? Not in terms of jump in the ranking, but let's say who acquired who.
Actually, one thing that stands out, and that is almost a little, it's probably a little boring, but it is just the way it is. The same, we basically have the same top three again. LanguageLine Solutions, they are so big. They are so far ahead of everyone else. I think they are bigger than the next 9 companies after them together, in terms of revenue. So they are massive. And they continue to be number one. And they actually, for them as well, the pandemic kind of turned out really well, because they already had, first of all, they make 95% of their revenue from interpreting, and most of that is remote interpreting. They have their own hardware as well, so they were very independent there and could really kind of cash in on that trend as well, with more healthcare providers needing remote solutions even more than before, Similar for Cyricom, from what I know. And then here, it looks like a new name, but it's really just someone dressed in a different costume, because so AMN Healthcare, that is a healthcare staffing company. They acquired Stratus Video. That was the number 3 in our last ranking as well. And so basically what we see here now as AMN Language Services is the rebranded Stratus Video. And so, yeah, we have the same top 3. I think the big word actually went down a little bit because they had a lot of on-site interpreting. But I know that since then now they have also added increased their remote business. So again, these figures are from the last financial year, not from this year. So we'll see what that looks like. UpHealth as well. That used to be Cloudbreak. I added Marty behind here because that's what they're known for as well when it comes to remote interpreting. That's their platform. Global Talk in our last ranking, they were still TVCN, the largest provider from the Netherlands. What else do we have here? I really can't say off the top of my head who jumped the highest here, but I will find out, and maybe I will put this as an extra note in the report. This is actually
we'll put that as an extra goodie into the report.
Yeah,
biggest, overachievers.
One thing that I think is worth pointing out is last time we had the cutoff at about 5 million. I think it was slightly below 5 million, whereas you can see this time it was more around 4 million, which kind of indicates like the big gap as well. And like I think it is probably an indicator of the impact from the pandemic. So, on the top, the providers grew a lot, and at the bottom we had some more losses as well. This isn't true for everyone, but there's definitely a little bit more of a gap, even more than before. So
there is. So I have another question for you here, and that is looking at this ranking.
Oh, okay.
There are names here of companies that you would normally associate with, localization services as opposed to interpreting, and I'm making that distinction. So what is easier than to sort of make a living on this market? Is it you being a specialist and growing that business, or your localization company and then you're tacking on interpreting because this is the fashionable thing to do? Like what's your take on that? Like what is a good way to go about this if I'm a business owner of an LSP?
Well, I think overall it's hard to say, but one thing I think that jumps off the page actually, and we have a little one of the columns we have here. So here in this ranking, we don't list the overall revenue of the companies. Yeah, we just list the interpreting revenue, which is hard to dissect for some companies. But I think we did a pretty good job. I'm praising myself now, but I did a very good job.
You did a pretty good job.
I'm excellent. No, we got a lot of the interpreting revenues confirmed, is what I'm trying to say. But I left a little note here as well. See the percentage of overall revenue. So how much does the interpreting revenue contribute to the overall revenue of the company? What you can see is that technically in all, like with the big ones on our ranking here, they are pretty much specialists in interpreting, right? So Language Line Solutions is 95, they are 95. I will address this one because it's misleading. These ones here, so lots and lots of them are, at least in the top 10, a lot are more or less exclusively focused on interpreting. So I think that does tell you something already. Whereas AMN Language Services, it says 5%, but the Stratus Video that is hidden in there actually makes 99% of their revenue on interpreting. I only indicated it as 5% here because they belong to AMN Healthcare now, and that is a massive company. I think 2.7 billion or something. So within that, the revenue is small, but that is not their focus. So again, this is a little bit misleading. I think they were acquired also because they were one of the leaders in interpreting as well. So I think that's telling in itself. On the other hand, interpreting is definitely, I think, a field where it might take a little longer to make more money off it because it's a bit more... At least in the beginning, you have more manual involvement. With all the scheduling for interpreting, it's a bit more complex. You cannot have as much automation as for translation, I think. Of course, after a while, when you become a bit more established and you're probably like an oiled machine like Language Line Solutions, they have all their OPI business and VRI business now in place for a long time. They have their own hardware. They have thousands of interpreters they work with. And then they can probably also automate a lot because then it's just probably a matter of, and a lot of companies are starting to do that. They have these IMS solutions, interpreter management and scheduling solutions, or where, sometimes you can match the the right interpreter with the right request automatically. There's no manual intervention needed. But when you're starting out, I think there's a lot more manual work involved in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And overall, we know from looking at translation versus interpreting, we see a lot more large translation companies than interpreting companies. And that's also why, sorry, last comment on this question, I swear. For example, I did not include TransPerfect and LionBridge in the ranking because, assuming purely by their size that their interpreting revenue would be large enough, I would personally not consider them leaders in interpreting, of course, because they are kind of companies that can do anything because they're so big. They also have interpreting services, but that is not their focus. So that's why I only included them, or will include them, on the watch list. That's not even in here yet. Sorry, I probably over-commented on the question there.
No, you did very well. And that's a very good footnote there, that we're not listing the transperfects of the world because they, in our terms, they do not qualify. And we had no one else than Tucker Johnson asking us this question the other day. So, yeah. We have an explanation for everything here at Nimdzi. All right, so really the last question here, and for those of you watching this or listening, note that the index that we published is the ranking. There's a little bit of write-up around it. So Sarah did write up great. But the big bulk of the report is coming a little bit later this month or next one. So Sarah, with that being said, give us some teasers, like what is going to be in the report, like what are the big things you're talking about there that we haven't chatted about today?
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to talk about some of the stuff we addressed today already. Basically, I wanted to take people a little bit through the journey of the last year and a half, especially since, the last interpreting index was 2 years ago, and back then it was really a different landscape. There's a very heavy focus on remote interpreting in this year's edition because, it was just the talk of the town. It was what has been happening mostly in the industry, right? And so I'm answering the question of, is remote interpreting here to stay? And spoilers, yes. And will it replace all instances of of on-site interpreting? No, it won't. And to answer the question of the why behind that, I wanted to take people a little bit back and see how did it develop over the last year and a half to kind of show why I think it's here to stay and why the future will be predominantly also a future that will have a lot of hybrid meetings, remote and on-site, of course. Then I talk about the boom with Zoom, of course, and interpreting becoming more mainstream. We also talk about the rise of interpreting in telehealth. Again, this existed before, but there's more happening there, and there's also integrations happening there with telehealth platforms. We talk about investment and M&A. I talk about geographies. Where are the companies located? Where is the money coming from? Who's the biggest player? Then I mentioned community interpreting as well, and sign language interpreting, at least briefly, both of those. And kind of what drives interpreting as well. What are the main drivers behind all this? Some of the legislative challenges. We had the AB5 struggles in California with the AB5 law. Brexit is having an influence. I know I'm saying I was gonna review everything today, and then there's lots and lots of talk about all the growth, like percentages and market sizing and all of that stuff, the usual, basically. And also a little bit about some of the growing pains, I want to call it. So there's been a lot of growth, but what have been the growing pains and how have people come out of it? It was a big challenge. Like, I don't want to hide that in talking about that. I think we are coming out of this better than we went into it. I firmly believe it, but that is not to say that the last year and a half wasn't difficult for a lot of businesses as well. So I highlight some of the growing pains there as well.
Right. Well, it sounds like it's going to be one a heck of a read, so prepare your coffee, sit tight. It's going to come later this month or between end of this month and start of next one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so with that, Sarah, thank you very much. We flipped the table here. You've done a great job answering questions about your own work. If that was going to be easy, no matter what. So what's your parting comment here about whether the index or interpreting? What should the audience remember here?
Well, I think something that I kind of just alluded to there as well, and that is that I really think we're coming out of this, like when I say we, I mean the interpreting industry, all the sides of it, coming out of this stronger than we went into it. Because yes, it was very difficult, like the sudden change, going from just like a lot of on-site to suddenly going remote. And it's not just that, interpreters had to adjust, the interpreting providers had to adjust, but also the clients had to adjust. Yeah, you can have the best remote interpreting solution, but if your client isn't set up for it, then it's no point. So there was a lot of education and training needed. Like I said, people added services, they added platforms, they added features, they added integrations. So the interpreting world has been incredibly busy in the last year and a half. People have been just reshuffling everything internally and learning and developing. But now that they've done all of this, accomplished all of this, clients have seen that this works, fears have been removed, new client requests are coming in, new meeting requests are coming in. This is really opening the door to a whole lot more opportunities. And the interpreters and the companies are way better prepared. And it's not like, same as if you're looking at translation, we looked into e-commerce and the traditional brick and mortar stores developing a web presence now. Well, they're not going to take it down again after the pandemic, now that they invested the money into it. Same as with remote interpreting, now that it's more established and people have added it, it's not going to go back. The genie is out of the bottle. Like, it's here to stay.
True.
Of course, again, it will not replace all instances, but I think it will just come with so many more opportunities. Like, it's almost like nothing can hit us now, and I kind of don't want to jinx it. That sounded like
no, knock on wood.
Exactly, I'm knocking on wood here. So, but you know what I mean. It's just companies added adjacent services. Maybe someone will become that multilingual meeting provider as well. That really was like, and I don't usually like this comment with what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But I think in this case, it's kind of true. A lot of companies were really struggling for survival, but the majority came out of it. And you can even see it with all the rewards coming in, with all the investment from outside. We just constantly get new requests for consultations about interpreting. Then we read about new mergers and acquisitions and more investment in interpreting, new platforms. It's just so in demand now. Right. I really, really believe that.
Many opportunities.
And I really look forward to it. I'm actually excited to see what comes next because I think there's a lot more exciting stuff to come.
Hey, it does sound like there's more work for us, so we'll take it for sure. With that, Sarah, this was brilliant. Cue the outro music. And for our audience here, this was Sarah Hickey, and usually the host, this time the guest. I was grilling her this time. So stay tuned. Follow us on all our social media and watch out for the full Interpreting Index, the ranking of the top interpreting providers in the market, which is coming later this month. We'll close this live stream and Sarah is going to get back on the draft. It's coming soon.
Thank you so much, Gabe. I have no idea if the outro music is already too loud for what we are saying, but I'm trying it anyway. This was really fun. Next week, I will be on medical leave, but I will be thinking of all of you. And I will be back the week after with a new wonderful guest, maybe also with the same one, who knows, because Gabe is kind of my new stable guest. He's the number one guest on the show. So thank you, Gabe.
It's a pleasure. We had fun. I'm looking forward to the next episode of the last 2 weeks in localization. We'll need to rename it at some point, I think.
Last month in localization.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Gabe. Thanks, everyone, for the comments and for watching. Bye.
Bye.